Hello everyone, I am Miss EP214, Wholesale and Retail Lecturer at Gert Sibande TVET College, the Standerton campus. Today I'm going to be delivering a Level 2 Wholesale and Retail lesson, particularly still focusing on Module 1. In the previous lesson, we covered the first section of Module 1. So for this lesson, we are going to cover the next 2 lessons for Module 1. So for this lesson, we are still going to be continuing with Module 1. This time around, focusing on the second as well as the third section of the module. So at the end of this lesson, you as a Wholesale and Retail Level 2 student will be able to best do the following. You'll be able to identify using practical examples the subsectors applicable to the wholesale and retail industry. Secondly, you'll be able to identify categories of retailers within the wholesale and retail industry. And then you'll also be able to identify the various operational functions in a wholesale and retail outlet, as well as their main tasks. That is inclusive of the following: till operators, shelf fillers, sales assistants, receiving and dispatch, credit and cash office, administration office, as well as management. And lastly, you're going to be able to do the following. And lastly, you'll be able to identify the internal and external support functions that are applicable to a wholesale or retail outlet, which is including but not limited to the following: HR department, buying and planning, marketing, finance, IT, property, maintenance, logistics, electricians, communications, as well as consultants, just to name a few. Before we continue with section 2 and 3 of module 1, I'd just quickly like us to go back to a section that we covered in the first lesson. In the first lesson, we looked at the various roles that are played by the different stakeholders within the wholesale and retail industry. So what I'd like us to look at now is how each of that stakeholder would negatively be affected if the business was to close down its doors. Let's look at the first one. Just to quickly recap on the different stakeholders that we have: owners and shareholders, staff, suppliers, outside service companies, government, customers, banks, welfare organizations, the community, as well as the sector, education, and training authority. Let's get to the first one. So, if a business was to close down its doors, the owners and shareholders of the business would lose their investment in the business. Because obviously, in that instance, it would mean that the business no longer makes a profit. And the second one, staff members. Remember, these are the people that are employed by the business and they're earning a salary. So if a business was to close its doors, they would lose their jobs. And when they lose their jobs, it means that their families would also be affected, since they are also considered as stakeholders. And then suppliers. So if a business was to close down its doors, suppliers would also suffer, because it would mean that now they've got one less outlet that they are supplying their goods to. Then the next one, outside service companies. So with outside service companies, they would lose this business as a customer, and they would also lose their source of income, which is equally applicable to suppliers. And then the government. In the previous lesson, we mentioned that the main source of revenue for the government is tax. And we also mentioned that the more profits the business makes, it's the more tax it would be able to pay. So if a business was to close down, it means that the government would lose their source of income from this particular business. And customers. So if a business was to close down its doors, customers wouldn't have the choice of products or the convenience that particular business provided, and would have to look for another shop which is selling the same thing that the business that has closed down was actually selling. And then with banks. So banks, they would lose a source of income that previously allowed them to collect interest on loans, as well as service fees for the services provided. Then with welfare organizations, they would also suffer through losing donations that the store made to them. And the second last one, the community. The community. So if a business was to close down its stores, the individuals who are employed by that business within the community, they would lose their jobs. And lastly, the Sector Education and Training Authority, they would lose a source of income in an instance where a business closes down its stores. Let's now look at the two sections that we are going to cover in this lesson. All right. So firstly, we are going to look at recognizing sectors, subsectors, and categories in the wholesale and retail industry. So the wholesale and retail industry is a very large industry, and it is divided into different sectors, subsectors, as well as categories. That's what we are going to look at now. Sectors. So basically, the wholesale and retail industry is divided into two sectors, which is the formal and informal sector. So the formal sector is basically made up of large, medium, and small organizations that play all the parts that are mentioned in the supply chain. And the informal sector, it consists mainly of what is called micro enterprises, and they are usually very small traders like your tech shops or street vendors. And secondly, we are going to look at the different subsectors. Within the wholesale and retail industry, there are 5 main subsectors into which retail businesses can be grouped. In the wholesale and retail industry, there are 5 main subsectors into which all retail businesses can be grouped. And these businesses are grouped in accordance to the products that they are selling. Let's look at the 5 subsectors. The first one, it's furniture, CFTA, which is clothing, footwear, textiles, and accessories. And the third one is food. Fourth one, it's the specialty subsector, and the last one is fuel. So with the first one, the furniture, this grouping is one which all the furniture outlets fall under, like your Louise stores, OK Furniture, so on and so forth. And the second one, CFTA. This includes any store selling clothing, materials, shoes, or even accessories, like your Woolworths stores, Sports Scene, Mr. Price, and then the third one is food. So this includes all the supermarkets and shops that sell food as well as groceries. What's also important to note with this particular subsector is that we do not include any takeaway stores or restaurants because they fall under the catering industry, which is also known as the food and beverage industry. They do not fall under the wholesale and retail industry. And then the fourth one, specialty subsector. This is a very large grouping of outlets and actually consists of all the stores that sell any goods, except for those that we've already explained in the previous groups. So it would include things such as your jewelry stores like your American Swiss, music stores like your Musica, builders outlets like your Cash Build. And the last one, fuel subsector. These are retailers which basically sell petrol, like your Engine Garage and BP Garage. Now, what we are going to look at now, it's the categories of retailers within the wholesale and retail industry. There are 6 categories that we are going to look at. It's groups or chains, independents, SME, franchises, discounters, as well as convenience stores. Let's get to it. So, with groups or chains, very large retailers are often referred to as chain stores, which basically means that a retail store has many branches in multiple towns and cities. Like, for example, a typical example of that, take ShopRite, for instance. ShopRite has more than one store in multiple towns as well as cities. It's one business, but different stores operating in different areas. And then, in South Africa, there are companies who are responsible for a number of retail chains, which means that a number of retail chains will report to one company group. Like for instance, again, if we look at the TFG group, it's one group, but you find multiple different stores reporting under that same group. For instance, it's the TFG group, but you find the likes of the Scene, American Swiss, as well as your Foschini reporting under the same group. And then the next one, it's independents. So the independent retailer is a retail business where there are usually 1 or 2 outlets and there are only a few staff members that are employed within that business. So with your independent stores, these are the types of businesses where you only find one kind of that business in a mall, in a certain area only. And then SME. SMEs, it basically stands for small and micro enterprises, and they refer to both the formal and informal sector of our economy. And it covers businesses that employs not more than 50 people. And the next category that we are going to look at, it's franchise. Let's suppose that you have got an interest of starting a business of your own, but you are worried that you will not be able to compete with already existing businesses. Then you have a chance of getting into business with a well-known organization, under a well-known name, with an excellent support office to assist you, guide you, and provide you with stock at a good price. And in exchange for that, you pay this organization a certain fee and percentage of your sales or even profits. So you as the individual who's got an interest of getting into business with this well-established organization, we classify you as a franchisee. And the organization that you would like to get into business with, we classify that business as a franchisor. The next category that we are going to look at, it's discounters. Discounters are basically retailers that sell their products at a low profit margin in order to attract as many customers as possible. And they sell large quantities of their products. Typical examples of that would be the likes of your Clicks as well as ShopRite. And the last category that we are going to look at, it's convenience stores. The convenience store is a store that sells a limited range of fast-moving consumer goods, which we normally refer to as the FMCG. And the FMCG, when we are speaking about the FMCG, we are basically referring to products that sell fast and are needed by customers every day. Typical examples of that would be the likes of your bread as well as milk. And with convenience stores, these are the stores that stay up open for a period of 24 hours. And then again, typical examples of your convenience stores, these are the stores that stay open for 24 hours. So most of the time, it's the stores that you find at the fuel stations. So in the last section of this module, we are going to look at the wholesale and retail operational and support functions. We'll start with the operational functions within the wholesale or retail outlet. And there are 8 functions that we are going to look at. The first one, receiving and dispatch. Secondly, shelf fillers or merchandisers. Thirdly, sales assistants and sales consultants. Cashiers or till operators. Cash office, credit office, administration, as well as management. Let's get to it. Receiving and dispatch. So in a large store, this department is normally divided into 2, with the receiving clerk as well as a dispatch clerk. So the receiving clerk, that's the individual who is responsible for handling the goods that are coming into the store, such as the deliveries that are made by suppliers. And the dispatch clerk is the individual who deals with the products that are leaving the store to be delivered to the home of the customers, to be delivered to other stores, or damaged stock to be returned to the supplier. However, in a small store, only one person can be responsible for both receiving as well as dispatching. The second operational function, shelf fillers or merchandisers. These are the people who are responsible for filling the shelves and ensuring that the shelves are never empty in the floor of the business. The third operational function is sales assistants as well as sales consultants. So sales consultants are the staff members who normally stand behind the counter or walk among the racks of clothing and assist customers with any queries that they might possibly have. That also includes finding out if the products that the customers are looking for are actually available at a different store. The fourth one, cashiers or till operators. So cashiers or till operators are staff members that work on the tills, that record the sales transactions and process different kinds of payments with the customer. The first one, cash office. So the staff member who occupies this office is classified as a cash office clerk. And this individual is responsible for cashing up together with the cashiers, balancing cash, preparing the deposit, as well as controlling change. So the next one is credit office. So with a credit office we find in businesses where goods can be bought through hire purchase agreements or accounts. And also, there will be a credit clerk who is responsible for managing the accounts of the customers. And the second last one is administration. So with administration, obviously, every retail business has paperwork that has to be completed. And this has got to do with the day-to-day running of that retail store. And making sure that those records are managed properly is very important. Examples of paperwork that could be completed are as follows: controlling timesheets, completing overtime claims, as well as keeping leave and sick leave records. So with controlling timesheets, this is where staff members have to clock in and record when they come to work or when they leave work, as well as when they take lunch breaks. One thing that we also need to keep in mind is that staff members are paid by the business to be at work. Completing overtime claims. So sometimes, especially in large retail stores, some staff members work overtime and they need to be paid extra for this overtime that they work. So this employee who is working overtime would need to complete these documents and submit them to the payroll department or manager for that salary to be paid. That will be the end of lesson 2. So now let's quickly recap on the contents that we have covered in this lesson. So we looked at the sectors. That's where we spoke about the fact that there is the formal and informal sector within the industry. Then secondly, we looked at subsectors. That's where we mentioned that there are 5 subsectors into which all the retail businesses can be grouped. That's where we spoke about furniture, CFTA, food, specialty subsector, as well as fuel. So we also looked at the categories of retailers in the industry. That's where we said that there are 6 categories within the industry. That's where we looked at groups or chains, independents, SME, franchises, discounters, as well as convenience stores. And lastly, we looked at the operational functions within the wholesale or retail industry. That's where we looked at receiving and dispatch, shelf fillers or merchandisers, sales assistants and sales consultants, cashiers or till operators, cash office and credit office, administration, as well as management. Please still do tune in for the third lesson, where we are going to continue by looking at the internal and external support functions of the wholesale and retail outlets. Thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.